Greetings, friends and fellow travelers, and welcome to this week's episode of Life Mastery TV. This is your source for inspiration, empowerment, and fulfillment. My name is David McLeod, and I am your Life Mastery coach and host of this program. And today we're going to be talking about something that I think affects a lot of people. Not just some people, but maybe even everybody, at least to some degree. And we're talking about this topic of codependence. Now, codependence is something that is normally associated with relationships involving one or more participants who struggle with addiction or illness. However, sad truth is that codependence can happen in virtually any relationship. And in fact, if you haven't already done some deep inner work on yourself, you may be experiencing some codependence in at least one of your relationships. Now, I have invited the emotional pro here to join us today and to talk about this complex topic. Now, for years, she researched everything she could to discover where emotions come from and how to work with them and whether they can be tamed for the long term. As a California psychotherapist with many years of amazing experience, my guest has developed a comprehensive and powerful way to know what emotions are all about and how to become an emotional master. In fact, she has written a brand new book that is coming out right now. It's being published even as we speak. It's called Emotions in Motion, Mastering Life's Built-in Navigation System. And we're going to tell you a little bit more about how you can get a hold of it later on in the show. Meanwhile, please join me in welcoming the amazing Eileen Dillon to our program today. Welcome, Eileen, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. There's nothing I can add to that. That was great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's almost as if you wrote it yourself. No, I'm just kidding. No, I met you for the first time at Soul Treat back in April.
Right.
And we made a really nice connection. I just enjoyed spending time with you, and I knew I wanted to have you on this show. Great. So I'm so glad we're finally able to make it happen. And, you know, you and I were talking before we started, and you told me something that I had no idea about, and that is that you used to do your own online radio show for 17 years. Wow. I mean, that's amazing.
Actually, a little correction, 13 years. Wasn't 17.
Oh, 13 years. I apologize. Yeah. That was my brain doing incorrect math.
Ended it in 20s. That's where. So you were accurate. Yes, right. It was called Full Power Living, and it was focused on awakening the world to the power and importance of human emotions, which meant I could talk about almost anything because emotions are part of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Emotions are a powerful energy that we have, and I call it energy in motion. I don't know if that's the term you use, but yeah. Powerful energy that we have within us that really helps us to express who we really are and helps us to know what's going on around us.
Well, I have a chapter in my book on codependence, and I put it in there because codependent behaviors and codependent connections bring up almost every emotion in our lives. And I thought we really need to talk about that. And I believe that because emotions don't belong to us and we don't really belong to them, I tend to call emotions energy that comes up in us or that appears with our experiences, but not necessarily that those emotions are in us, which is an interesting distinction.
Yeah, that is an interesting perspective for sure. Well, you mentioned codependence, and that is the topic of our show. So maybe you can help us out by just defining or describing exactly what you mean by codependence.
Let me go back to the 70s. My first husband, whom I married when I was 19, after he and I created a child together, she was 10 months old. We did this consciously. He came home one day and said he wasn't ready to be a father, and he left. And I got really, really angry. And part of my anger was to say to myself, that man used me. And I said, I'm a therapist. I'm going to figure out how people use one another so I don't get in this situation again. So I started talking with my clients, talking with my colleagues, reading, looking at my own life. And it took me about 6 months, David, before I learned what I call the first rule of energy sapping, because to me, codependence, manipulation, energy sapping are interchangeable terms. And that is, the first law is that it takes one to know one. And I had to admit that if he was manipulating me, then I was manipulating him in some way. And what I discovered was that I believed myself to be unlovable. And here was a man who not only said that he loved me, but he loved me enough to marry me. And that is how I was using him to affirm to myself. But
well, so it takes one to know one.
Yes.
In other words, if I understand you correctly, you were seeing something in your husband and you thought that the same thing might be in you. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that the idea?
I knew that the same thing was in me.
Okay.
And it also points the way of how to get out of it. All we really have to do is end our own codependence, our own energy sapping, and it will end in our lives. We can outgrow it then. So we're talking a bit about that today. But This led me to start looking at, how do people become manipulative? How do they, this concept of energy sapping, using somebody else's energy for myself without their permission or knowledge very often, how does that start? And it came to me that it starts when we're infants, when our bodies and brains are not capable of functioning in the world. And so we have to have an agent to put our energy through. Usually it's parents. I cry, my parent brings me food, my parent changes my diaper or whatever, but I put my energy through an agent. And then I began to realize that starting at about age 2, children want to reverse that a bit. They start saying things like, me do it myself, except that they're not capable of doing it themselves, of living life themselves. But I observed that by the time we're almost 4 years old, we're capable of asking for a glass of water, getting our own water, pulling our blanket up or whatever. So point, by my observation, we are designed to start putting our energy through ourselves, to be our own agent in the world. Now, as an infant, I need to have an agent. If I don't have that agent, I'm going to die.
Right.
But when we mature, we don't think of maturity as I have to have somebody else be an agent for me and help me function in the world. Otherwise, I'm going to die. Instead, it's like, I would ask you, will you do this with me? I'd really like to do it with you. And if you say no, or you're not available, then I'm okay. So by the time I'm an adult, I need to be in want, not need. Does that make sense? And we start at age 2, and then effectively at age 4, we can actually begin the progression so that we grow out of this need to have agents help us function in the world so that we can become mature. However, we need help. And usually we need it from parents. And to me, I can see that we haven't had a very good job done of helping kids to grow out of manipulation, because our world is just full of manipulation. And why not? And it's because we need help. And parents either don't know that we need help, or they think that it's too much to ask little children to be responsible for their own lives or their own choices, or the parents themselves are still connected in an energy draining way, and they're terrified of disconnecting.
Right,
and so we
right.
don't get the help. So our bodies continue to grow so that we look like we're adults, but emotionally we're still age 4 or younger.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of sad, really. And, I think one of the things that you alluded to here, and I would like to just draw a little more attention to it, is parents are people who went through the same process before they became adults. And so they may have had their own emotional needs ignored or neglected or not taken care of in some way. And as a result, they too haven't figured out how to do this. So here we have a young baby somewhere between 0 and 4 years old who's trying to figure this out with a parent who doesn't know how to give the answers.
Exactly.
And this is why people like you and I, somehow we figured out how to do our own inner work and to heal some of those old wounds from childhood and maybe to become more emotionally mature. We have learned how to practice emotional intelligence in some way. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying I've learned everything I need to learn yet.
I am.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, at least I believe I'm much better equipped now to have children than when I was a 20-something year old father and I had no skills at all. It's really sad. And here's the other problem that I see is people who are in their 20s, they think, I don't need any help. I got all the answers. I certainly was like that. And almost all the people I was with were like that. Us 20-year-olds, we were fearless. We were indestructible. We had all the answers. We knew it all. And the truth is, we didn't know anything. And so when I try and tell a kid a 20-something, you don't know as much as you think you do, they just don't want to hear it. And they don't want to do the work that they're going to have to do by the time they're 40.
Well, we all came here, in my view, we've all come to the earth in order to learn. So we all have to go our own path as part of our learning. And the universe is quite cooperative. It keeps throwing stuff at us all the time,
Yep.
And so I think that it's kind of an interesting setup that when we're young, we believe we know it all. We have experience of horrendous experiences hitting us. I knew it all. I married at 19. I had a child at 28, and I was having a wonderful life, and my husband left me. Right? Bam, There it was. So one of the things that I talk about in my book, Emotions in Motion, is how our earth is a big giant school. We've all come here in order to learn. And I think that codependence is one of the major learnings that we need to do. We essentially come to the earth and we can't survive on our own, so we have to connect for our survival with other people. Then through our childhood and our early adulthood, we start standing on our own. And then if we're fortunate, we'll define ourselves clearly enough so that we can get back together with other people on the level of interdependence. And that's my understanding of the way it's supposed to occur. But we can't be independent if we're still being codependent, because as you were alluding to, at least, if you're not complete and you don't have your energy, you're not responsible for yourself, and I'm not responsible for myself, we can't get from each other what it is that we need from the other person.
Right.
Instead, what I found is if I pay attention to making myself as whole and complete as I can, and you do the same, then when we come together, we can create more.
Right. Now, you said something very, very interesting here. And in fact, you brought 3 words into the conversation. First, you talked about codependence and then growing out of it and becoming interdependent.
Right.
And you also mentioned, and that is an interesting distinction. I think those are two very powerful words. And I sense just as you're saying them, codependent sounds kind of dysfunctional to me. Just that's because I've been learning stuff through psychotherapy and stuff. And interdependence sounds quite a bit more healthy. It sounds like something that we really want to cultivate. And then, of course, the third word that you mentioned was independence, which I'm not sure where that fits. Is it possible to be codependent and independent? It seems unlikely to me, but it does seem possible to be interdependent and independent. Is that accurate?
I would tend to agree with that. I think that codependence is a part of the process that we're designed to go through and get to the other side of, except that we've lost track of that and we don't ask ourselves to get to the other side. I also would like to say that my experience, I was a psychotherapist for 50 years. I've worked with an awful lot of people, and my experience tells me that most of us are not totally codependent. We're codependent in what I call pockets. I may be very independent or responsible in one area of my life or with certain relationships and not in other areas. And the ideal in order to be interdependent or independent is to be able to stand on our own 2 feet. It's like we come here, we're connected with our parents, we go out on our own, and then we can connect not in the same tight way we did with parents, but as a community.
Right.
And that's the ideal progress. And I would add, I don't think there's anything wrong with being codependent. It just isn't very functional. It just doesn't work very well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't like using the words right and wrong, good or bad. Those are just value judgments that we place on things. But I agree that sometimes we can look at something and say, this isn't really working too well. I think I need to find a different way. And,
right.
And not a better way, a different way.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to watch our language, because the moment you put value judgments on things, then you start polarizing stuff. This is a bad relationship. This is a good relationship, and all that kind of stuff. So, all right, well, here, let's just take a pause for a moment. And we've talked a lot about what happens and how codependence actually works and how we come into it through our young humanness and grow up to a point about 4 years old, where the time that you believe that we're starting to think about independence.
Yes.
Now, the question that I have is, how can people today, how can I evaluate my current relationships and determine if there's maybe a little too much codependence in there, something that might not be healthy for me? How could I figure that out?
Well, we go back to that issue of need versus want. When you're in a relationship, let's say you'd like your husband or wife to do something with you, go someplace with you, entertain your parents, whatever. And the thing that you need to do is to look at your own behavior. If your behavior is, I have to have this person do this, I don't know how I'm going to get them to do it, then you're being codependent. If your behavior is, I'd really like for them to do this, and what can I do if this person isn't interested to do this with me? How do I want to approach it then? Then you're not being codependent. So you want to look for that need. The need brings us to want to control other people, to insist that they have to do things a certain way, to manipulate, to guilt trip is what I am meaning to say there, to do whatever we can to get the other person to do what we think we need them to do.
Right. I think manipulation is a perfectly good word, because really, let's face it, that's what it is. And we all do it to one extent or another. I mean, I can think of many, many times in my life when I have tried to get someone to behave the way I wanted them to behave. Yeah. And I didn't think of it so much as an underlying need for that behavior, but I certainly know that I like having control. I do know that I like it when things go my way. Well, I understand now that that's really a lot of my ego mind and everything else. It's not really what my soul wants. My soul actually wants for everyone to have full expression and, exchanging of love and all that kind of stuff. But my ego mind, which is a fear-based device, is always thinking, well, if you don't do this, then that person is going to do X, Y, Z. It makes up all these complicated, drama-filled stories that really don't have any basis in reality and get me moving in a particular direction that leads to manipulation. And I know other people do it. In fact, I will say unequivocally that 100% of the people on the planet manipulate other people at one time or another.
Oh, I would agree, definitely. And I think that it creates a lot of the problems that we have in our world too, because ideally that spirit mind that you have that supports everybody to be living the way they need to live is what we really want to do. We want to do it in our parenting. We want to do it in our intimate relationships. We want to, everywhere we'd like to really support people in doing what they came to the earth to do. And manipulation literally gets in the way. And I believe that we're in a time, I'm pretty sure most people are aware of this now. We're making a huge transformation here on the earth. We're making so many changes. And I believe that we're going to be having a better experience here on the earth, a kinder, more spiritual experience when this turmoil is done. And I believe that two things really need to be handled for us to get to that place. One is that we need to master emotions, and two is we need to start becoming non-manipulative. We need to end that. So that's why I'm wanting to share with the world what I learned. This information changed my life, this approach, because I could suddenly see, somebody else is using me. That's not good. Well, if somebody else is using me, it's not good for me. I didn't feel good. When you're manipulated, you often get really furious, out of proportion to what's going on. You get angry. There are all kinds of emotions that get. Not only is the other person manipulating me, but that's showing me that I'm also still manipulative. So let me look for what I can do so that I can be responsible for my life and not think that I have to have somebody else behave in certain ways so I'll be okay. We need to get out of that trap.
Right. Well, and I'll agree with you that I think that we are kind of on the cusp of a major transition in awareness, emotional intelligence. All that stuff seems to be happening. At the same time, I notice that, there's still a lot of struggle and strife and pain in the world. There's still a lot of that there. I'm not sure how much more we have to do to transition that. Does anybody know the answer to that question? But what I do know is this. I cannot change anything outside of myself. The only thing I can change is this.
Right.
This being right here. And one of the things that I try and do, and through my whole life mastery program, I really do try to promote the idea of compassion and forgiveness. These are the two, there are 10 keys altogether in my program, but those two, I think, are vitally important. If we can learn to practice compassion in every area of our lives, including any codependent relationships we might happen to be in, having compassion for the other person rather than finding fault with the relationship, this is really, I think, a very, very important thing, because when we are stuck in this codependent loop that you're describing, then we're suffering.
Yes.
And compassion is the key to relieving suffering. That's what we need to do. We need to bring that to it. And then, of course, the forgiveness piece is saying to ourselves, okay, I allowed myself to get into this relationship. I created some of this relationship. I need to forgive both myself and my partner, no matter how painful that might seem to be. Those
Right.
are the keys, I think, to bringing more healing into the world.
I really agree with you. And I would only add that the compassion and forgiveness starts at home, that we need to have compassion for ourselves and, recognizing that I got myself into this situation, or there's something here that I need to learn. That's a way of being compassionate. Let me just finish with a story of something that I brought up earlier. I said that my first husband had left me when our daughter was 10 months old, saying he wasn't ready to be a father. And I was angry with him for quite a long time. And I made changes in myself so that I could let it go and move on, which is what we really need to do. I don't want to stay angry with somebody for years, because then they get me twice. That's my way of looking at it.
Yeah.
So when our daughter was about 6 years old, my ex-husband called me, and he had since remarried, and he had a child recently. And he called me and he said, now that I've had a child, I feel like I'm ready I realize how much I wasn't there for you when our daughter was born, and I'm calling to apologize.
Wow.
Yeah. And I said, wow, that's really nice. Thank you so much. But he continued. He said, I feel really guilty for having done that. In fact, I feel so guilty. Sometimes I can't look our daughter in the eye. Now, this is a 6-year-old, right? And I said to him, well, in that case, there's a condition to my forgiveness. And I heard him on the other end of the phone go, and I said, the condition is that you forgive yourself. Because if you don't, she won't have had you when she was little, and she won't have you from now on either.
Yeah.
He said, okay, I can do that. So I just wanted to tell you that story because I think it fits with what you're talking about there. Yeah. Yes, we need to forgive. We need to have compassion. And it's not just for other people. It starts with ourselves. When we are compassionate and loving and supportive and forgiving with ourselves, then that just spills over into life, gets reflected back to us, and it's the best thing we can do.
Right. Well, Eileen, that is a beautiful story, and something that I think all of us would love to have happen in our lives, where someone we believe has done us wrong at some point actually comes back after a period of time and apologizes. That is just a beautiful, beautiful thing. It says that this other person has done some inner work, has done some healing, has done some kind of introspection, whatever it is, uncovered a shadow perhaps, and recognized a part of himself or herself that was acting out in a dysfunctional way. And I think it's beautiful when that person is able to come to you in a place of vulnerability and just say, I know I screwed up. And I can see now how I screwed up. And I wouldn't have had the opportunity to grow like this had it not been for my relationship with you. So I'm grateful, and I'm sorry that I caused you this pain. I think it's wonderful that happened for you. And I think when I hear stories like that, it helps me to see that when I'm feeling that same kind of energy where it's time for me to apologize to somebody, it makes it easier for me to do that.
Uh-huh.
So I think, we need to hear stories like that. It helps us to grow. It helps us to be inspired. It helps us to be motivated. It helps us to see our connection to everyone else on the planet.
Yes, and I would like to add that I believe I had a part in that, even though he and I weren't spending a lot of time relating. And I think it's a part that all of us need to have, which is to turn loose of it ourselves. As long as if I continued to be angry with him and hold it against him and think of ways to take retribution or anything like that, there's no room for him to come back to me.
Right.
Right. So the part that I played was I said, okay, that happened. It didn't feel good. Whatever was going on is what went on, and I'm going to let it go. I'm going forward with my life. And so I think there are two parts to this, and we can't have control over the other person's part, but we sure can have control over ours. And I will say that I'm very grateful to him that he did take the time and trouble to call me up and say that.
Right. Well, your process of letting go was an actual process of forgiveness.
Yes.
Because you can't let go unless you forgive. It's really that simple.
My definition of forgiving is to let go. Yes.
Of course.
So
and what you're really letting go of is you're letting go of a couple of things. You're letting go of your own pain. That's the first thing. Yes. And you're also letting go of any ideas you have of revenge, or I think you use the word retribution.
Yes.
And that's really the secret. If we can do that, then all of a sudden we just open up the space for miracles to happen. And that's the beauty of it.
Yes. Well, just to follow up on that, I had a very rough early childhood, and someone very close to me was a perpetrator of sexual molestation for me. Mm-hmm. And I was angry with him for many, many, many years. And then the idea of past lives I began to open to, and I thought to myself when I was in my 40s, my gosh, if there is anything to this past life stuff, I do not want to have to go through this kind of thing again. So I determined that I was going to forgive this person. And I found an opportunity, and I said to him, I forgive you for what you've done, for you being angry with me. I forgive you for everything. Will you accept my forgiveness? And he said, yes. And I said, will you forgive me for my part? Because I've been angry with you, and I've been distant and unforgiving and so forth. And he said, yes. And then I was able to thank him for the role he did play in my life that was positive for me. And we were able to do this essentially when he was on his deathbed.
That's beautiful.
It just changed my life forever. So what I realized is as long as I was angry with him, I was allowing him to get me twice, not only at the time of the perpetration, but when you hold anger or any emotion inside, it grows and it poisons the vessel in which it's being held, which is me.
Right.
So that's what I mean by being gotten twice. So it wasn't just for him that I forgave. It was more for me. Let me turn this loose, please.
Well, that's beautiful. And I ultimately, as beautiful as that whole story was, and I'm sorry that it had to wait until the person was on his deathbed, but it does happen like that sometimes. In fact, the person may have died, and it's still not too late to forgive.
I agree.
Forgiveness, as you said, forgiveness is not about the other person. It never is. It's always about me. When I forgive, what I'm doing is I'm giving myself permission not to feel that pain anymore. Right. I'm giving myself permission to release it. I'm giving myself permission to let go of those thoughts I have for revenge or retribution or judgment or whatever.
Yes.
The other person doesn't even have to know I've done that forgiveness.
Right.
Now, if you can have that kind of dialogue like you had, it can be even more powerful. But I'm just saying that the forgiveness piece is all about the person doing the forgiving, not the other person.
And I think it's really important what you mentioned, because I've certainly done this with therapy clients over the years whose maybe whose parents or sibling or cousin or whoever died already.
Right.
You can do this. You definitely can do it after somebody's not here. You can write a letter. You can have a conversation. Just say what's in your heart and ask for what you want. And it just is so cleansing. The idea, for many years, I was angry about all the things that happened in my early childhood. And I had a dear friend who said, all those things were lessons that you asked for. Right?
Yeah, I agree with that too. And while it's happening, it sure doesn't feel that way.
No. And so I resisted, she said, you need to go back and take a look at it. I resisted it. And finally, I started thinking about, for example, I was 6 months old. My father was away during World War II. My birth mother did not take good care of me. I had whooping cough. She left me with a babysitter coming back in a few hours and didn't come back for 3 days. I would have died if the babysitter hadn't taken me. Now, that's awfully early. That's a lot of stuff to forgive somebody for, right? And to ask myself, why would I need a lesson that early in my life? What would I possibly be trying to teach myself? And I realized that at the very least, I learned about compassion. I had a demonstration of somebody caring for me when I could do nothing for them. There were so many lessons tied in with that, to say nothing of possible past life behaviors.
Right.
And so to understand, and then I realized that with all the stuff that happened in my early childhood, it really built compassion in me. I had gone through so much. I really get what it's like to go through things, and it made me a better therapist.
Yeah, that's beautiful too. Yeah, I'm sure we could talk all day about stories and stuff that we've gone through, from infancy all the way up to current time of our lives. And I'm really excited that we are talking about this. And if you don't mind, I want to just bring us back now to the codependence discussion.
Darn.
Because there is just one piece that we haven't covered yet that I want to make sure that we get to. The problem is people may recognize that they're in codependent relationships. And it may seem on the outside that the only option is to leave the relationship. Can you help us understand some other choices that we might make to either improve the relationship, heal the relationship, do whatever we can to get the relationship back on track so that we don't necessarily have to leave it?
That is a wonderful question. I really like that. And my answer is that at least in part, the solution is to leave the relationship, but not to leave it like getting a divorce or moving out, but to stand back and spend time with myself, with your own self. All of life emanates from the inside out. And what happens when we are still codependent or manipulative as adults is that we haven't yet been able to stand alone, like the cheese in the Farmer in the Dell song. We haven't just stood in the middle of the circle and been alone for a little time. And people who are manipulative, they can't stand spending time alone. If you ask them to spend 24 hours without contacting other people, it'll drive them nuts, right?
Right.
Because we believe that we're not going to be okay if we're not connected to other people. And so the key thing is to develop ourselves to the point where we know we are whole in and of ourselves, connected to our spiritual self, etc., but not needing to have the other person stay married to us, go to the various things that we like to go to, compliment us whenever we think we look nice or whatever. You know, we can't, it won't work to keep trying to draw on the other person. Now, in the meantime, we can be loving and forgiving. However, to really end codependence, the trick is to end it in ourselves. And for that, we have to stand back. We may need to take a week or two and go out to a cabin someplace and just spend time without a television or a computer or a smartphone or a telephone or anything like that. We have to spend time alone.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that's a powerful tool. I mean, I think people should spend time alone, whether they're in codependent relationships or not. But what I'm hearing you say is, and I agree with this, by the way, I have to take responsibility for my part in the codependent relationship, and I have to do whatever I can to heal my own side of it.
Right.
But the question is, if I want to stay in this relationship, if I want the relationship to be healthy on both sides, how can I encourage my partner to maybe take some of these steps for him or herself in order to improve the relationship for both of us?
Well,
and by the way, I mean encourage them without manipulation.
Right. Well, the biggest encouragement, of course, is my own changes. You know, if I married you and we're in a relationship and I go to make major changes in myself, that's going to put pressure on our relationship. You may have some resistance. You may not like who I am being at that particular moment. I may find you annoying as all get out. So what we need to do is we need to be loving and kind, and we need to communicate. I need to tell you, this is what I'm doing. I'm planning to learn how to stand on my own 2 feet, and I'm doing it because I hope our relationship will get better.
Right.
Now, there's a principle that help that isn't asked for doesn't work. So I can't automatically say, well, David, here's what I suggest you do so that we can meet. What I need to do is just be who I am, share with you what I'm doing, what I'm discovering, and not ask anything of you. Because that then will give you the room. I can tell you I care about you. I can tell you I'd like you to come along with me, but I need to be okay if you're not willing or able to do that, right? So the key really is to develop myself, be as loving as possible, and leave room as well as invitation for you to come along with me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. It sounds like a great model for all relationships, whether they're codependent or not.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the secret to a good relationship has to be in communication anyway. You know, we have to get into that powerful, mutually self-empowered communication, and we have to both learn it on both sides of the fence. And so if something is not working for me, I have to speak up. If something is working for me, then I should say something about that too. Mm-hmm. In other words, we have to learn to appreciate each other while at the same time feeling like it's safe to tell the other person when something doesn't feel right. We have to have that freedom for each other.
Well, we have to create it for ourselves and invite the other person, but we also have to remember that the other person may not want it. As I was moving into marrying my husband, Bob, who died about 3 years ago, it took him 4 years. He talked about marriage, but for 4 years, he did nothing about it. And finally, one day I said to him, I'm not listening to you anymore because it's all talk and I get interested and then nothing happens. And I said, and by the way, what is it that's keeping you from moving forward? And he said, well, you're asking me to make so many changes. And I said, really? Well, he was a smoker. And I had said to him, I don't do well with smoking. So I said, I know about this one. Oh, no, many, many more. I said, well, could you just tell me one of those things? Because I can't think what they are. And his response really surprised me. He said, "You're asking me to become fully conscious. That's what." And I said, "This is a bad thing?"
Yeah. Wow.
But you see, that's part of what we're facing. If I go and look at my energy draining, then I'm really becoming a lot more conscious. And then I've created kind of a vacuum to pull you into if we're in relationship. And you may not want to go there.
Yep. It's comfortable sleeping.
for a lot of the day, but not forever.
That's right.
So it's an interesting thing. And again, we on another program, maybe we can talk about fearless living. One of the things I've discovered is a way of reducing fear to practically nothing in my life.
Oh, I can't imagine people would want to learn that.
Oh, I can. Well, so like here I am in my mid-70s. I'm in my RV. I have lived traveling the U.S. on my own with my little dog for 2.5 years now. And people go, "Oh, you're so brave." It's not brave at all. I'm not frightened. I'm just doing well. And I think that's the way we all need to live our lives.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, look, Eileen, we've kind of reached the end of our time for today's discussion, and it's been absolutely awesome. I absolutely want to have you on the show again. I think you're just a delight to be here, and obviously very wise, and you've got a lot of great gifts and teaching that people can benefit from.
If you keep talking to me like that, I'll come several more times.
Well, it's come in my heart. It's true.
Thank you.
It's what I feel. So I just, I want you to hear that. So I just want to remind people about your new book. Now, let me get the title again. I know it's called, I lost the title. What's the title again?
Emotions in Motion, Mastering Life's Built-in Navigation System.
What a great title. Emotions in Motion, Mastering Life's Built-in navigation system. Awesome. And so you're going to be having a special launch party coming up on September 19th, and you're trying to get to bestseller status. So you want people to go to Amazon
on the
and
19th.
Get a copy of your book.
Yes, and tell their friends. And tell their friends.
In print, right.
Yeah.
Now, in the meantime, you said that you've got people, you have a couple of chapters that people can download for free on your website. And just tell us your website address again.
It's emotionalmasteryforlife.com. And at the top, it says Emotional Mastery Book. Just click there and you can download 2 chapters, the first 2 chapters. And I'm so excited. The book publication process takes a long time, and we're finally getting there.
Yeah,
I've been wanting to write since I was 16, so I'm ready.
Well, good for you, and congratulations. So emotionalmasteryforlife.com.
Yes.
And then they can find the link on that page.
Yes.
Okay. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Eileen, for joining me today. It's just been an absolute pleasure. And I will definitely get a hold of you, and we'll do something again soon. Meantime, I want to thank all of you for joining me today and for sharing this beautiful journey with Eileen. Remember, you can catch all of the recordings of all previous episodes of this and all other shows on my website at lifemasterytv.com. That's life-mastery-tv.com. And before we go, I just want to remind you to practice the Life Mastery mantra every single day. And remember, it goes like this. I gratefully forgive the imperfect being I have been in the past. I gratefully accept the magnificent being I am right now. And I gratefully welcome the evolved being I am becoming in each new moment. Thank you again for joining me. My name is David McLeod, your Life Mastery Coach, and I'm wishing you love, light, and blessings on your continuing journey. Bye-bye for now.